Welcome, listeners, to the Restricted Handling Podcast's What's Coming Up Next Week in the World. Today, we'll dive into the significant global events that are already on the calendar for the coming week. Buckle up. First up, Monday, March 16th. Big day for the EU. The Foreign Affairs Council will be meeting in Brussels. European Union foreign ministers, led by Kaja Kallas, will be joining in for an informal exchange with Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, all via video conference. The topics? You guessed it, Ukraine and the Middle East. This is key as the EU is gearing up for a leaders' summit later in the week, and they're going to need some solid alignment. Expect more discussions on how to talk the talk and walk the walk, with some behind-the-scenes work streams forming. Also on March 16th, EU energy ministers are meeting for the Transport, Telecommunications, and Energy Council in Brussels, focusing on energy security and the ongoing concerns from the Middle East conflict. Moldova and Ukraine's energy ministers will be joining the conversation. With all the drama around energy prices, particularly in Europe, this meeting is going to zero in on making sure that Europe's energy grids are resilient, especially with Ukraine still in the fight. Shifting gears to Tuesday, March 17th, in Brussels, the General Affairs Council will convene with EU ministers responsible for European affairs in attendance. This meeting is going to set the stage for what will eventually be shared at the European Council Summit later in the week. So expect to hear a lot of language and key points being fine-tuned, everything from security to energy and, yes, Ukraine. This is where the EU gets its message straight before the big show. Moving to the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. and South Korean forces will be continuing their annual military exercise, Freedom Shield, from March 15th to 19th. This exercise is going to be a hot topic in North Korea, and it'll likely lead to some sharp rhetoric from Pyongyang. All parties involved are going to be sending clear messages about the defensive nature of this drill, but don't be surprised if tensions bubble over. The North is watching closely, especially with a history of using these drills as triggers for escalation. Also on Tuesday and Wednesday, the Federal Reserve will hold its March policy meeting in Washington, D.C. The world's eyes will be on how the Fed reacts to the ongoing geopolitical and energy-driven inflation risks. Expect the usual, some rate chatter, and you can bet the language will be watched closely, especially considering how inflation is being fueled by events in the Middle East. The United Nations will hold closed consultations on the 1701 report, a file that's critical for Middle East stability, especially with the ongoing situation between Israel and Lebanon. If you've been paying attention to these discussions, you know they have the potential to trigger some serious diplomatic pressure. Any fallout from this meeting could affect more than just the region. It could resonate in other geopolitical hotspots, too. Over in Japan, the Bank of Japan will be holding its monetary policy meeting on March 17th to 18th. Given the energy volatility across the globe, how the BOJ communicates its stance on inflation and growth is going to be closely scrutinized. Anything less than the expected can cause market ripples, so don't blink, especially if they announce anything unexpected. In Moscow, on Wednesday, March 18th, Russia will mark the 12th anniversary of Crimea's accession to Russia. This date, as always, will stir up the political rhetoric surrounding the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Expect some loud statements coming out of the Kremlin to reinforce Russia's narrative, with a likely reminder of their self-congratulatory stance on Crimea's integration. Meanwhile, Ukraine and the international community will continue to reject this anniversary as a form of state propaganda. Meanwhile, European central bank meetings will continue on Wednesday and Thursday, with a press conference on the 19th. As Europe deals with the fallout from energy supply disruptions linked to the Middle East conflict, any new direction the ECB takes could send ripples throughout the global financial landscape. Markets are going to be watching for any hint at how they plan to stabilize the economy amidst this crisis. On Thursday, March 19th, we've got the Bank of England's monetary policy meeting. How will the UK address the inflationary pressures tied to energy and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine? Expect some key language about balancing recession risks while keeping inflation in check. Keep an ear out for any sign of divergence from the EU or the Fed, especially since the UK plays a critical role in European security. And let's not forget the EU Leaders Summit on March 19th to 20th. This is the top-level gathering where the EU will hammer out decisions on Ukraine, as well as their collective response to the Middle East and its growing energy, security, and migration impacts. With top leaders like Volodymyr Zelensky, Antonio Guterres, and Christine Lagarde attending, expect big decisions and even bigger headlines, especially when it comes to putting pressure on Russia. Lastly, Friday, March 20th, marks Eid al-Fitr, an official holiday across the UN system. Diplomatic work will slow down as many offices close, so don't expect any major decisions coming out of the UN that day unless it's urgent. But with the Middle Eastern crisis, urgency could be a theme. Before we wrap up, here are a few things to keep an eye on. North Korea could make a move in response to the Freedom Shield exercise, so watch for any potential missile tests or angry rhetoric. The EU summit leaders' meeting might produce some post-summit surprises, especially with how they plan to deal with energy pressures and Russia. The Fed's leadership politics could throw a wrench in the works. There's a nomination process in Washington that could shake things up with the current Fed chair's term ending. That's it for next week's rundown. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.